My name's Allison Cecil, and I'm a human geography teacher in Kentucky. And Elodie just sent the link to the first bullet I have on there. And that is that the key resource I use with my students in review is what I call the Big Ideas packet. And so this is a packet where what has happened is I've taken the topics and I've split them up essentially with my different students. And each of my students, then they are assigned a page and they kind of do the main ideas related to that topic. And then they also place the relevant essential knowledge statements at the top. Now, Kevin mentioned the essential knowledge statements that in the course and exam description appear on the right-hand side. During this review time in particular, I emphasize essential knowledge statements, obviously in my teaching, but I really emphasize it to students during review because students are feeling, I mean, how many of us are feeling overwhelmed at this point in the year, right? Our students are feeling that as well. And so as a result, there's this whole idea of what do I study? And what I have found is that most students, for them studying is defaults to staring. So they're doing something very passive, staring at a page, staring at a video that they're playing. The problem with that is there's no actual brain processing really going on, or if there's any, it's very minimal. And so I tell them you want to be very focused in your studying. And so especially during review time, even more than earlier in the year, I tell them, look at those essential knowledge statements. Now, giving them the CED in full tends to be overwhelming. And so again, they're at the top of each page. And what they do is they prioritize their studying. So at home, I don't give any homework whatsoever during our little review period that I do. Instead, their homework is simply to review, which I have found that conveying to freshmen that studying is homework is sometimes a little bit challenging because they don't have something tangible to turn in. And so that's why each of them submits a study plan. So they tell me based upon what's your goal score and how have you done in the class so far. So if I have a really high score in the class, I've done awesome and my goal score is a 5, that's appropriate. And I don't really have by this point that much work to do. I'm just brushing up on a few things. On the other hand, if I've kind of struggled in the class or oftentimes with my students maybe struggled earlier in the year, and I want a 4 or 5 for that to be reality as opposed to just being like, yeah, I want a 5. I'm going to actually have to do work. So what I really like to do is have students look in AP Classroom at reports. So if you've been assigning items to students in AP Classroom, have them go to the reports tab. You can also do this for each of your students. I have a lot of students, a lot of you do as well. And so it's also good for them to look at this data individually anyway about themselves, and they can quickly identify topics that are their weaker topics. That should be a priority, because another thing that I find is that oftentimes with especially our advanced placement students, we might assume that they know how to study. They do not. So if you haven't taught them how to study throughout the year, they still don't know how to study. And even if you have, they probably don't know how to study. It's something that I find that I constantly have to work with them on. And so if they just study by default, not only will they just stare at a page, but they'll also start with what? They'll start with topic 1.1. But maybe they have topic 1.1 as their strongest topic. So should they actually start with that topic? No. So I teach them how to identify their priority study topics, and that's then what they focus on in their at-home study plan. And then during class, we have these stations. And so I divide my class into 1/3. I have them work in cooperative teams. I've looked at their data in AP Classroom. So these teams are mixed, not only in terms of performance levels, but also you might be the high performer in the group, but whatever your weak topic is, there's like a mid to a low performer where your weak topic is their strong topic. And so I spend kind of a ridiculous time on the groups, more than I should probably admit, but it works really, really well. So they have these in-class stations, and I'm going to show you a quick example, and then I promise we'll wrap up. And so if you forward to the next slide, What we do is for each unit, I have 1 day of review, and they'll have a vocab review station, a major concept station, and an FRQ practice. And so I've pulled an example of what I do for Unit 2. Next slide. And so this would be an example of, in Unit 2, we're talking about population. And so if you had to pick a key concept in population, wouldn't it be the demographic transition model? I mean, that's kind of what weaves everything together. And so they're looking at the DTM, they're labeling it. This is stuff we've done earlier in the year. They're applying it in just a slightly different way. They're talking about a limitation. They're drawing population pyramids that might correlate to those stages and giving any examples. And then this would be an example of the vocab station that I utilize for Unit 2. And so here I've just done a little story, and they're picking some of the vocabulary that fits the best. And there are, in some cases, more than one term that can fit. That's totally okay. I want them debating that. I want them thinking about that. Please, you'll see kind of the continuation of that. I also, through these stations, try to model review strategies that the students can use. So I tell them, you could take for any unit, 15 to 20 terms, and you create a story around those 15 to 20 terms. Now, I have some kids where that would be pure torture for them and they hate this activity. I have other kids where this is like their favorite thing. And I'm like, hey, if this is like a really good thing you like, that's what you use then as a study strategy in part. If you hate it, use another strategy. And then for the free response section station, I will take an old free response question. So here's a released free response question. And if we forward to the next slide, you'll see that I'm not having them just answer the question that's asked. Instead, what I'm having them do is, like in part A, pick the response that would earn a point. In part B, I am having them just answer it. In part C, I'm saying, fix this response. It didn't get a point. What's wrong with it? And then continuing on to the next slide. In part D, take these responses. How could you combine these ideas for a really good answer? What's wrong with this one? What's wrong with that one? Now answer this one. I actually de-emphasize full FRQs to students. My students have written FRQs. They understand the timing. I do 3-minute practices with single FRQ parts all year long. This mixes it up, makes them think about things differently. And students that you have that would just leave things blank, they're in teams. I had challenged each team to have the best responses. They have that little bit of competitive aspect to it. And they will, I've found, be responsive to these sorts of activities. And so that's really what I do with review. I do 7 days of that, 7 class days, 1 for each unit. Again, I do a different version of vocabulary activities, a different major concept station, and a different FRQ sort of based activity for every unit. And again, it's not only to review, it's also to model study strategies that then the kids can use themselves.